was one of those cold Monday mornings when the wind seemed to cut right through your jacket. The kind of morning where kids rushed from their parents' warm cars into the school building, breath visible in the chilly air. At Oakwood Elementary, the day was starting like any other, with children filing into their classrooms, chattering about their weekends and complaining about having to wake up early. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez had been teaching third grade for 15 years. She'd seen just about everything in her classroom. Happy kids, sad kids, troublemakers, and quiet ones who sat in the corner with a book. But that Monday morning, something caught her eye that made her heart sink in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. 8-year-old David Chen walked into the classroom, and with each step he took there was an odd flapping sound. Mrs. Rodriguez looked down and felt her chest tighten. The boy's shoes were falling apart. The sole of his right shoe was completely separated from the top, held together only by what looked like gray duct tape wrapped around multiple times. The left shoe wasn't much better, with holes visible on the side and the back heel worn down to almost nothing. David kept his head down as he walked to his desk. He'd always been a quiet child, the kind who did his work without fuss and rarely asked for help. Mrs. Rodriguez watched as he quickly tucked his feet under his desk, as if trying to hide them from the world. But it was too late. Several kids had already noticed. "What's wrong with your shoes?" A girl named Ashley whispered loudly to her friend, not quite quiet enough. A few students turned to look, and David's face flushed red. He pressed his lips together and stared down at his worksheet, pretending he hadn't heard anything. Mrs. Rodriguez cleared her throat loudly. "All right, everyone, let's get started with our morning work. I want complete silence while you finish the math problems on the board." Her tone was firm, and the children quickly turned their attention forward. But she couldn't stop glancing over at David, who sat hunched over his paper, his worn jacket still on even though the classroom was warm. Throughout the morning, Mrs. Rodriguez observed David more carefully than she had before. She'd always known he was a good student. He turned in his homework every single day, his handwriting neat and careful. He was polite, never caused trouble, and had a gentle way with the other kids. But now she was noticing other things. His pants were too short, ending well above his ankles. His jacket had a tear in the sleeve that someone had sewn up with thread that didn't quite match. And at lunchtime, while other kids pulled out sandwiches and snacks from their lunch boxes, David had only a small bag with what looked like a few crackers inside. When recess came, most of the children ran outside excited to play. David moved more slowly, and Mrs. Rodriguez noticed he walked carefully, as if each step hurt. Those shoes probably had no cushioning left at all. She watched from the window as he sat on a bench rather than joining the other kids on the playground. He wasn't reading or playing a game on his own. He was just sitting there looking tired in a way that no 8-year-old should look tired. After recess, Mrs. Rodriguez made a decision. When the children were working on their art project, she quietly called David up to her desk. "David, can you help me carry these supplies to the art room?" she asked with a warm smile. The boy nodded and followed her out into the empty hallway. Once they were alone, Mrs. Rodriguez knelt down so she was at his eye level. She spoke gently, choosing her words carefully. "David, I noticed your shoes are having some trouble today. Are you doing okay? Is everything all right at home?" David's eyes immediately filled with tears, though he blinked rapidly to keep them from falling. "Yes, ma'am," he said quickly. "Everything's fine. My mom says we're doing just fine." "I know your mom works very hard," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly. She'd seen his mother a few times during drop-off, always rushing, always looking exhausted. But sometimes people who work hard still need a little help. "There's nothing wrong with that." David shook his head firmly. "My mom says we don't need any help. She says we're managing." His voice was defensive, protective of his mother. "She's getting me new shoes soon," she promised. "She just has to save up a little more." Mrs. Rodriguez felt a lump form in her throat. This child was defending his mother's pride, while his shoes literally fell apart on his feet. "Of course," she said warmly. "I know your mom is doing her best. You're a good son, David." She stood up and put a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Now let's get these supplies to the art room." But as David walked away, that flapping sound echoing in the quiet hallway, Mrs. Rodriguez knew she couldn't just leave it alone. This wasn't right. A child shouldn't have to go to school like this. The rest of the day dragged on. But Mrs. Rodriguez couldn't stop thinking about David. During silent reading time, she noticed him shivering slightly despite his jacket. At dismissal, she watched as he walked out to meet his mother, who pulled up in an old car that sputtered and coughed. His mother, a small woman with tired eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy bun, gave him a hug and they drove away. The woman was wearing scrubs, probably heading straight to work. That evening, Mrs. Rodriguez sat at her kitchen table, unable to focus on grading papers. Her husband noticed her staring off into space. "What's wrong?" he asked. She told him about David, about the shoes, about the way the boy had defended his mother's pride even while clearly struggling. "I want to help," she said, "but I don't know how. If I just buy him shoes, it might embarrass him, and his mother might refuse. I've seen it before with families who are too proud to accept help." Her husband thought for a moment. What about the other parents? Surely some of them would want to help if they knew. Mrs. Rodriguez considered this. The parent community at Oakwood was generally caring and involved. Maybe there was a way to help David without making it obvious or embarrassing. Maybe there was a way to preserve his mother's dignity while still ensuring this child had what he needed. She opened her laptop and logged into the school's private parent Facebook group. For a long moment, she stared at the blank post box, thinking carefully about what to say. She couldn't mention David by name. She couldn't give away too many details, but she needed to reach out. Finally, she began typing. Her message was simple and vague, asking if any families had gently used children's shoes they could donate to the school for students in need. She kept it general, not mentioning any specific child or situation. Then, her finger hovering over the post button, she hesitated. Was this the right thing to do? Would it help or make things worse? She thought again about David's face, about the way he'd tried to hide his feet, about how he'd bravely defended his mother while his shoes fell apart with each step. A child shouldn't have to worry about things like this. A child should be thinking about friends and games and learning, not about whether his shoes would make it through another day. Mrs. Rodriguez took a deep breath and clicked post. Within seconds, her message was out there in the digital world. She had no idea that this simple act, this small request for used shoes, would set off a chain of events that would change not just David's life, but the entire community. She had no idea that by tomorrow morning, her phone would be buzzing with messages, that parents would be reaching out with offers that went far beyond a pair of shoes. All she knew was that a child in her classroom needed help, and she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Whatever happened next, at least she'd tried. At least she'd taken that first step, and sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. When Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at school Tuesday morning, her phone had already buzzed 17 times. The parent Facebook group post from last night had exploded with responses. Parents were commenting left and right, offering shoes, clothes, even asking if families needed food or other supplies. She sat in her car for a moment, scrolling through the messages, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. This was more response than she'd expected from a simple request for used shoes. But before she dealt with the flood of offers, she needed to understand David's situation better. She needed to do this right. After the morning bell rang and her students were settled with their reading assignment, Mrs. Rodriguez walked down to the counselor's office. Patricia Green had been the school counselor for nearly 20 years. She was a warm woman with kind eyes who seemed to know every child in the building by name. When Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on her door, Patricia looked up from her computer and smiled. "Helen, come in. What brings you by so early?" Mrs. Rodriguez closed the door behind her and sat down. "I need to talk to you about David Chen, one of my third graders." Patricia's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. She pulled up something on her computer. "David Chen, yes, I know him. Quiet boy, good student. What's going on?" Mrs. Rodriguez described what she'd seen the day before. The torn shoes, the too small clothes, the tiny lunch. I posted in the parent group asking for shoe donations and the response was huge. But before I do anything else, I need to know more about his situation. I don't want to overstep or make things worse. Patricia nodded slowly and pulled up David's file. "What I'm about to share with you stays between us, understood? Student privacy is important." When Mrs. Rodriguez agreed, Patricia continued. "David's mother is Lisa Chen. She's a single parent raising David and his 6-year-old sister, May. The father isn't in the picture anymore. Did he leave?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked quietly. "Worse, he was abusive. Lisa finally got the courage to leave him about 2 years ago. She packed up both kids in the middle of the night and drove 3 states away to get as far from him as possible. She came here because she had a distant cousin in the area, but that cousin moved away 6 months later. So Lisa stayed anyway, figuring it was safer to be alone here than to go back. Mrs. Rodriguez felt her throat tighten. So she's been on her own this whole time? Completely. She works 2 jobs to keep them afloat. She's a nurse's aide at the hospital, working night shifts from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Then she goes straight to her second job, cleaning houses from 8 until 2 in the afternoon. She sleeps for a few hours, picks up the kids from school and aftercare, makes them dinner, helps with homework, and then starts all over again. That's impossible, Mrs. Rodriguez said, shaking her head. How does anyone survive on that little sleep? Patricia's expression was sad. People do what they have to do for their children. But here's the thing, Helen. We've offered help before. The school has resources, connections to programs, food assistance, clothing vouchers. Every time we've approached Lisa, she's politely but firmly declined. She's proud. Too proud, maybe. She doesn't want charity. She keeps saying they're managing fine on their own. But they're not fine, Mrs. Rodriguez said, thinking of those shoes. David's shoes are falling apart. He barely has any lunch. And I noticed yesterday he was shivering in class. I know, Patricia said softly. Believe me, I know. But we can't force help on people who don't want it. All we can do is be here when they're ready. Mrs. Rodriguez left the counselor's office feeling more determined than ever, but also more uncertain about how to proceed. She couldn't just ignore what she knew. But she also couldn't charge in and risk offending Lisa Chen, who'd probably been through more hardship than Mrs. Rodriguez could imagine. Back in her classroom, during lunch period while the kids were in the cafeteria, Mrs. Rodriguez decided to observe more carefully. She walked through the lunchroom slowly, watching the interactions. David sat at a table with a few other quiet kids. He'd pulled out his crackers, eating them slowly, making them last. Other children around him had full lunches: sandwiches, fruit, juice boxes, chips, cookies. Then something happened that made Mrs. Rodriguez's hands clench into fists. A group of boys from the 4th grade walked past David's table. One of them, a bigger kid named Tyler, who was known for being a bully, pointed at David's feet under the table. "Hey, look at Trash Boy's shoes," Tyler said loudly, laughing. "Did you find those in a dumpster?" David's face went bright red. He quickly pulled his feet back under his chair, trying to hide them. The other boys at his table looked uncomfortable, unsure what to do. "I bet his whole family shops at the trash pile," another boy joined in. "That's why everything's so raggedy." Mrs. Rodriguez was about to march over there when another child stood up. Kevin Park, one of David's classmates, stood up from the table and looked directly at Tyler. "Leave him alone," Kevin said firmly. "There's nothing wrong with his shoes." "And even if there was, it's none of your business," Tyler laughed. "Oh, what are you, his bodyguard?" "I'm his friend," Kevin said simply. "Come on, David, let's go sit somewhere else." He picked up his lunch tray and David quickly gathered his crackers. Another boy from their table, Ryan, also stood up. "Yeah, we're sitting over there now." The 3 boys moved to an empty table on the other side of the cafeteria. Mrs. Rodriguez watched as Kevin opened his lunchbox and quietly slid half of his sandwich over to David. "My mom always packs too much," Kevin said casually, as if it were no big deal. Ryan did the same with his apple. "I'm not even hungry for this." David looked like he might cry, but he took the food with a quiet thank you that Mrs. Rodriguez barely heard from where she stood. She felt her own eyes getting wet. Sometimes the kindness of children could break your heart in the best way possible. But what Tyler had said stuck with Mrs. Rodriguez for the rest of the day. David was being bullied because of his situation. It wasn't just about having worn-out shoes. Other kids were noticing, talking, making fun. That could damage a child's confidence, make him feel ashamed of circumstances that weren't his fault at all. After school, Mrs. Rodriguez checked her phone again. The Facebook group had even more responses now. Over 40 families had commented, offering shoes in various sizes. But several parents had gone further, asking questions. "Is this for one child or multiple families?" one mother asked. "Are they in need of more than shoes? Can we help with clothes, food, school supplies?" One comment in particular caught her eye. It was from Diana Foster, a mother whose daughter was in Mrs. Rodriguez's class. Diana owned a small marketing business in town and was always organizing fundraisers and community events. Her message was longer than the others. "Helen, I don't know the specific situation you're seeing, but if there's a family truly struggling, maybe we should do more than just collect used shoes." What if we organized a proper fundraiser or support system? Our community has resources. Let's use them. I'd be happy to help coordinate something bigger if you think it would help. Message me privately. Mrs. Rodriguez sat back in her chair thinking. This was getting bigger than she'd planned. She'd just wanted to get David a pair of decent shoes without making a big deal about it. But maybe Diana was right. Maybe this was an opportunity to do something more meaningful. Something that could help not just David but other families in similar situations. Before she could respond, her classroom door opened. Patricia, the counselor, poked her head in. Helen, do you have a minute? Of course. Patricia came in and closed the door. I got a call from the hospital this afternoon. Lisa Chen called the school office from her break, asking if we had any information about extra food programs or after-school care scholarships. She didn't come right out and ask for help, but she was asking questions. Detailed questions. Mrs. Rodriguez sat up straighter.
She's reaching out?
Carefully. Very carefully. I think she's at a breaking point. I think she's realizing she can't do this alone anymore, but she doesn't know how to ask for help directly. Her pride won't let her, so what do? Patricia smiled slightly. We make it easy for her to say yes. We frame it not as charity, but as something she's earned, something her children deserve. We find a way to help that doesn't make her feel like she's failing. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly, an idea beginning to form. What if we created some kind of scholarship or assistance program? Something official sounding that doesn't feel like a handout? That could work, Patricia said thoughtfully. If we approach her the right way, explain that David qualifies based on certain criteria. Make it about his merit as a student rather than about their financial situation. Then she might accept, Mrs. Rodriguez finished. She'd be accepting help for David, not for herself. The two women looked at each other and Mrs. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out. Maybe they could help this family without crushing the pride of a mother who'd already been through so much. But first, they needed a plan. And they needed to be very, very careful. By Wednesday morning, the situation had taken on a life of its own. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at school to find 3 large boxes sitting outside her classroom door, filled with children's shoes in various sizes. A note on top read, "From the Martinez family. Hope these help whoever needs them." Before first period even started, 2 more parents stopped by with bags of clothes. In the teacher's lounge during morning break, other teachers were buzzing with questions. What's going on with all the donations? Mr. Thompson, the 5th grade teacher, asked. I saw at least 6 parents dropping things off this morning. Mrs. Rodriguez carefully chose her words. She couldn't mention David specifically, but she also didn't want to discourage the sudden outpouring of generosity. Just some families helping out other families who might need it. You know how our community is. It's more than that, though, isn't it? Said Ms. Cooper, who taught 1st grade. I've been teaching here for 8 years and I've never seen a response like this. What exactly did you post in that parent group? Before Mrs. Rodriguez could answer, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Diana Foster, the parent who'd offered to help coordinate something bigger. Can we meet today after school? I have an idea I want to run by you. Also, the local news station contacted me about doing a story on community support for schools. Didn't give them any details yet. Wanted to check with you first. Mrs. Rodriguez's stomach flipped. The local news. This was spinning out of control faster than she could manage. She quickly typed back, "Let's meet at 3:30 and hold off on the news for now." During lunch period, Mrs. Rodriguez noticed David sitting with Kevin and Ryan again. Tyler, the bully from yesterday, walked past but didn't say anything this time. In fact, he seemed to be deliberately avoiding looking at their table. Mrs. Rodriguez wondered if someone had said something to him or if his parents had gotten wind of what happened. What she didn't know was that Kevin's mother had indeed called Tyler's parents after Kevin told her about the bullying. She'd been kind but firm, explaining that making fun of someone's financial situation wasn't acceptable. Tyler's father, ashamed that his son had acted that way, had a serious conversation with him that very evening. But that was just one small piece of what was happening behind the scenes. At 3:30, Mrs. Rodriguez met with Diana Foster in her empty classroom. Diana arrived with a laptop and a notebook full of ideas. Okay, Diana said, settling into a chair. I've been thinking about this non-stop. You posted about shoes and the community responded with an avalanche. That tells me people want to help. They're hungry for a way to make a real difference. I appreciate that, Mrs. Rodriguez said carefully, but I'm worried about this getting too big. There's a specific child I was trying to help quietly. Diana nodded. I understand, and we can still keep individual situations private. But Helen, think about it. If one child needs shoes this badly, how many others are in similar situations that we just don't know about? What if we created something bigger? A permanent support system? Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward, interested despite her concerns. What did you have in mind? A school assistance fund? We frame it as scholarships for families who need support with basic school necessities. Clothing, shoes, school supplies, whatever kids need to feel confident and comfortable at school. We raise money through community events and we distribute it through the school in a dignified way. No one has to publicly identify themselves as needing help. It was a good idea, a really good idea. But Mrs. Rodriguez still felt uneasy. What about the news station? Diana's eyes lit up. That's the thing. If we handle this right, a news story could help us raise significant funds. But we'd keep it general. No names, no specific children. Just a story about a community coming together to support kids in need. I already told the reporter we'd only do it if we could keep all families anonymous. Mrs. Rodriguez thought about David, about his mother working herself to exhaustion, about those terrible shoes. She thought about Patricia's words, that Lisa Chen was finally reaching out for help but needed a way to accept it that preserved her dignity. All right, she said slowly. But we do this carefully. Very carefully. Over the next 2 days, things moved quickly. Diana organized a small committee of parents who met Thursday evening at the school. Mrs. Rodriguez attended, along with Patricia the counselor and Principal Andrews, who'd been briefed on the situation and fully supported the initiative. They discussed logistics. How would families apply for assistance? How would they verify need without being invasive? How would they distribute support without embarrassing anyone? What if we had a school store? Suggested one parent, a man named Gregory who worked in retail. Families could come in privately like regular shopping and select what they need using vouchers we provide. Makes it feel less like a handout and more like regular shopping. We could set it up in one of the empty storage rooms, Principal Andrews added. Stock it with the donations we've been receiving, plus items we purchase with fundraiser money. Make it available to families by appointment so no one feels watched or judged. The ideas kept flowing. Someone suggested a back-to-school event each year, where families could get supplies without cost. Another parent mentioned partner programs with local businesses who might donate regularly. By the end of the meeting, they had the framework for something real and lasting. But in the middle of all this planning and organizing, Mrs. Rodriguez hadn't forgotten the immediate problem. David still had those terrible shoes. His mother still worked 2 jobs and slept only a few hours each night. The big community program was wonderful for the future, but David needed help now. Friday afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez made a decision. She'd been in touch with Robert Yang, who owned the only shoe store in their small town. She'd known Robert for years. They'd served together on several school committees. When she called and explained the situation without names, Robert had been immediately on board. Tell you what, Robert had said over the phone. Bring the kid by the store. Tell him he's won some kind of school award that includes new shoes. I'll fit him properly. Let him pick out what he likes and there'll be no charge. I'll also donate 20 more pairs of kids' shoes in various sizes for your new school store. I was a kid with worn-out shoes once. I remember what it felt like. Now Friday afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez had to figure out how to make this happen without David or his mother suspecting charity. She called Patricia over to strategize. We could tell him the truth, Patricia suggested, that he's been selected for a student achievement scholarship that includes new shoes. It's not really a lie. We are creating an achievement program and he is a good student. But what about his mother? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. She'd need to know to give permission. Leave that to me, Patricia said. I'll call Lisa at work and explain it carefully. That afternoon, Patricia made the call. Lisa Chen was on her break at the hospital, tired and wary when she heard she had a call from the school. Is David okay? Were her first words. David's wonderful, Patricia assured her. This is actually good news. We've established a new student achievement program this year, and David's been selected as one of the recipients. It comes with a voucher for shoes from Yang's shoe store. We'd like to take him there during school hours so it doesn't interfere with your schedule. Would that be all right? There was a long pause on the other end. Lisa was clearly suspicious. Why, David? Did something happen with his shoes? Patricia kept her voice warm and professional. David's been selected because he's an excellent student who consistently completes his work and shows great character. Several students were chosen. This is a new initiative to reward academic effort. Another pause. Then quietly, this isn't charity, is it? Because we're doing fine. We don't need Lisa, Patricia interrupted gently. This is something David earned through his hard work at school. Would you really deny him that? The line was silent for so long, Patricia thought the call had dropped. Then she heard a soft, shaky breath. Okay, Lisa whispered. Okay. Thank you. When Mrs. Rodriguez took David to the shoe store the next Monday during lunch period, his face lit up like she'd never seen before. Robert Yang greeted him warmly, measuring his feet properly and bringing out several options in his size. These are really for me? David asked, his voice full of wonder as he looked at the neat rows of brand new shoes. Really and truly, Mrs. Rodriguez said, her own throat tight with emotion. You earned them, David. You're a hard worker and a kind person. Pick whichever ones you like best. David chose a pair of sturdy sneakers, dark blue with white stripes. When he put them on and walked around the store, he stood up straighter. He actually smiled, a real genuine smile. They don't flap, he said, almost to himself. And they feel so soft inside. When they got back to school, several students noticed David's new shoes right away. Cool shoes, Kevin said immediately. Those look fast. Yeah, Ryan added. Bet you could run really quick in those. David grinned and looked down at his feet, wiggling his toes in shoes that actually fit, that had cushioning and support, that weren't held together with tape. For the first time in months, maybe years, he didn't want to hide his feet under his desk. Mrs. Rodriguez watched him throughout the afternoon, saw how his whole demeanor had changed. He participated more in class, raised his hand for questions, even laughed at a joke during story time. It was amazing what something as simple as proper shoes could do for a child's confidence. But this was just the beginning. The community's response continued growing. Diana and her committee finalized plans for a major fundraiser event in 2 weeks. The local news station scheduled an interview for next week about the community support program. More donations poured in daily. And somewhere in all of this, Lisa Chen sat in her car in the hospital parking lot during her break, crying tears of relief she'd been holding back for 2 years. Patricia had called her earlier to explain about the broader support program the school was creating, mentioning that if her family ever needed anything else, resources would be available with no questions asked. Lisa had been so tired for so long, so tired of working 2 jobs, of sleeping only a few hours, of watching her children go without while she tried desperately to hold everything together. She'd been so proud, so determined to prove she could handle it all on her own. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do it all alone anymore. Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez sat in her classroom preparing for a meeting she'd been dreading all day. Patricia had managed to schedule a sit-down with Lisa Chen, framing it as a routine parent-teacher conference about David's progress. But both educators knew this conversation needed to go deeper than grades and homework. At 3:15, Lisa arrived. She was still wearing her scrubs from the hospital, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She looked like someone who hadn't had a full night's sleep in years because she hadn't. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Rodriguez said warmly, gesturing to a chair. I know your schedule is tight. Lisa sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap. Is David in trouble? His grades are good, right? He's been doing his homework every night. I make sure of it. Local businesses had donated items for a silent auction. The bakery provided cookies and pastries. The hardware store set up a booth where kids could do craft projects. Even the local radio station was broadcasting live from the event. Families from all over town showed up, many of them not even connected to the school. Just people who'd heard about the Student Success Initiative and wanted to support it. Mrs. Rodriguez stood near the entrance, watching people stream in, still amazed at how much her simple Facebook post had snowballed. Next to her, Principal Andrews shook his head in wonder. In 20 years of education, I've never seen anything like this. We might raise $10,000 today, maybe more. It's incredible, Mrs. Rodriguez agreed, but her eyes were searching the crowd for one family in particular. Then she saw them. Lisa Chen had just arrived, holding May's hand while David walked beside her. Lisa looked different somehow. Less exhausted, maybe, or perhaps just less defeated. She'd actually had time to do her hair nicely, and she was wearing regular clothes instead of Scrubs. Mrs. Rodriguez later learned that Lisa had finally accepted the hospital's assistance program and had been able to reduce her second job to just 3 days a week instead of 6. Those extra hours of sleep were already making a difference. May spotted the face-painting booth and tugged on her mother's hand. "Can I, please?" Lisa smiled and nodded. "Sure, sweetie. David, you want to stay with your sister or explore?" "I'll stay with her," David said, taking May's other hand. The two children headed toward the activities area, and Lisa made her way over to where Mrs. Rodriguez stood. "You came," Mrs. Rodriguez said warmly. "I wanted to see what all this was about," Lisa said. "David's been talking about it all week. He doesn't know this all started because of him, does he? No one does except the people who need to know. And it's not about him anymore, Lisa. It's become something bigger." "Look around," Lisa did. She saw families from every background, rich and poor, all mingling together. She saw the local news crew interviewing Diana Foster about the initiative. She saw parents volunteering at booths, serving food, supervising activities. She saw community. "I visited the school supply store yesterday," Lisa said quietly. "Got May a winter coat and some pants that actually fit. Got David some new shirts. The woman running it was so kind. She didn't make me feel ashamed at all." "That's the point," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "No shame. No judgment. Just neighbors helping neighbors." As the morning went on, the fundraiser exceeded everyone's expectations. By noon, they'd raised over $15,000. But more importantly, something intangible was happening. People who'd never spoken before were talking, sharing stories, connecting. Several parents who'd been silently struggling mentioned to Patricia that they'd like to use the school store too. They'd been too proud to ask before, but seeing how well organized and dignified the whole system was, they felt comfortable reaching out. The local news piece aired that evening. It featured interviews with Principal Andrews, Diana Foster, and several parents who spoke generally about the importance of supporting children's needs. True to her word, Diana had kept all specific families anonymous. The piece focused on the positive community response, not on anyone's hardship. Within days of the broadcast, the initiative caught fire beyond their small town. Other schools called asking how to implement similar programs. A regional foundation reached out offering grant money. A nearby children's clothing store contacted them about becoming a permanent donation partner, but perhaps the most surprising response came from Robert Yang, the shoe store owner. He called Mrs. Rodriguez on Monday morning with an announcement. "I've been thinking about this all weekend," he said. "I want to start an annual program. Every August before school starts, any family that needs it can bring their kids to my store for free shoes. 1 pair per child, properly fitted. I'll cover the cost." Mrs. Rodriguez was speechless. "Robert, that's incredibly generous, but you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. "I told you I was a kid with bad shoes once. I wore shoes too small because we couldn't afford my size. My feet still hurt sometimes because of how they developed wrong. No kid should go through that. I can afford to do this, so I'm going to do it. I'm calling it the Shoes for Success program." When Mrs. Rodriguez shared this news at the next school board meeting, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The initiative they'd started was creating ripples far beyond what anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, Lisa Chen's life was quietly transforming. With the assistance from the hospital's employee program, covering May's after-school care, and with her reduced hours at her second job, Lisa was sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night for the first time in years. She had energy to actually play with her children. She could help with homework without falling asleep at the table. She could make real meals instead of just quick, cheap options. One evening, about 2 months after everything had started, Lisa did something she hadn't done since leaving her ex-husband. She invited someone over. Kevin's mother, Angela, had been kind to David, and the two women had struck up a friendship at school pickup. Angela came over for coffee one Saturday while the kids played, and the two women talked for hours. "I was so scared to let anyone get close," Lisa admitted. "After everything with my ex, I just shut everyone out. I thought if I didn't need anyone, I couldn't be hurt again." Angela nodded. "I get that. But isolation isn't safety, you know? Real safety comes from having people around who care about you, a community that has your back." "I'm learning that," Lisa said, smiling. "Slowly, but I'm learning." At school, David continued to thrive. His grades remained excellent, but more than that, his confidence had grown. He was participating more in class, making more friends, joining the after-school science club. Mrs. Rodriguez watched him flourish and felt a deep satisfaction. This was why she'd become a teacher. One day, about 3 months after the whole situation began, something happened that brought everything full circle. A new student arrived in Mrs. Rodriguez's class. His name was Anthony, and he was quiet and nervous. During the first recess, Mrs. Rodriguez noticed his shoes were worn thin, with cardboard visible inside through a hole. She felt that familiar tug at her heart, but this time, she knew exactly what to do. The school supply store was fully stocked and running smoothly. The support systems were in place. The community was engaged and ready to help, but before she could even approach Anthony's family, she saw something that made her pause. David had noticed the new boy's shoes too. During lunch, David sat down next to Anthony, who was eating alone. "Hey," David said casually. "You're new, right?" "I'm David." Anthony nodded shyly. "This is a good school," David continued. "The teachers are nice, and if you ever need anything, they really want to help. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. They helped me when I needed it, and it wasn't embarrassing or anything. They just care." Anthony looked at David with hope in his eyes. "Really? Really? And kids here are pretty nice too. Well, most of them. There's always a couple jerks, but whatever. You want to sit with me and my friends?" From across the cafeteria, Mrs. Rodriguez watched this interaction with tears in her eyes. David had learned one of life's most important lessons. That accepting help wasn't weakness, and that once you'd been helped, you could help others. The cycle of kindness was perpetuating itself. By the end of the school year, the Student Success Initiative had helped over 30 families at Oakwood Elementary. The school supply store was a permanent fixture, restocked monthly through ongoing community donations and fundraiser proceeds. Robert Yang's Shoes for Success program had provided new shoes to 42 children before the school year started. And most importantly, the culture of the school had shifted. Parents felt comfortable reaching out when they struggled. Teachers felt empowered to help without overstepping. Students understood that everyone goes through hard times and that helping each other was normal, not exceptional. Lisa Chen had become involved in the parent committee, using her own experience to help shape programs that truly met families' needs without shame. She'd found a better-paying position at the hospital, working fewer hours with better benefits. She'd made real friends in the community. David and May were thriving. On the last day of school, David gave Mrs. Rodriguez a card he'd made himself. Inside, in his careful handwriting, it read, "Thank you for caring about me even when I didn't think anyone noticed. You changed everything." Mrs. Rodriguez kept that card on her desk for the rest of her career. It reminded her that sometimes the smallest acts of noticing, of caring, of reaching out, can set off chain reactions that transform entire communities. Years later, David would graduate high school with honors. He'd get a scholarship to college where he'd study education. He wanted to be a teacher, he'd say, because a teacher once looked at his worn-out shoes and decided to do something about it. Not just for him, but for everyone who might need help. And every August, on the day of the Shoes for Success program, David would volunteer at Robert Yang's shoe store, helping fit children for new shoes, making sure every kid knew that having shoes that fit wasn't a luxury, it was their right. He'd look each child in the eye and tell them what someone once told him. "You earned these through your hard work. You deserve them. Local businesses had donut." "David's grades are excellent," Mrs. Rodriguez assured her quickly. "He's one of my best students. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Patricia joined them, pulling up a third chair. "Lisa, we asked you here because we want to make sure David has every opportunity to succeed, not just academically, but in every way." Lisa's expression became guarded. "We're doing fine. I know things aren't perfect, but I'm working hard. The kids have what they need." Mrs. Rodriguez chose her words carefully. "You're an incredible mother, Lisa. The way you're raising David and May on your own, working 2 jobs, making sure they're cared for, it's remarkable. No one is questioning that. Then what is this about?" Lisa's voice was tight. Patricia leaned forward. "Lisa, we know you fled an abusive situation. We know you've been rebuilding your life from nothing for the past 2 years. That takes tremendous courage." Lisa's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't realized the school knew her history. "I didn't want that following us here. I wanted a fresh start. And you deserve one," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "But here's the thing. You don't have to do it completely alone. Our community wants to help, not because you're failing, but because that's what communities do. They support each other." Lisa shook her head. "I've taken charity before. When I first left him, we stayed in a shelter. People gave us food, clothes, money. I hated every second of it. I hated feeling helpless and pitied. I promised myself once I got on my feet I'd never need anyone's handout again. This isn't a handout, Patricia said firmly. This is community investment. There's a difference. How? Lisa asked, her voice breaking slightly. How is it different when I can't pay it back? When I'm taking things I can't afford to buy myself? Mrs. Rodriguez took a deep breath. Can I tell you something about my own life? When Lisa nodded, she continued. When I was in college, my father got sick. Really sick. My mother couldn't work because she was taking care of him full time. I had a full scholarship, but I still needed money for books, food, rent. I was working 3 part-time jobs and barely sleeping. Lisa looked up, really listening now. One day, I broke down in my advisor's office. Just completely fell apart. I was exhausted and scared and didn't know how I'd make it through. You know what she did? She connected me with an emergency fund the university had for students in crisis. She helped me apply for food assistance. She found me a better-paying campus job, and I fought it every step of the way because I was proud and stubborn and thought accepting help made me weak. Did you take the help? Lisa asked quietly. Eventually. And you know what I learned? Accepting help when you truly need it isn't weak.
It's actually brave.
It takes courage to admit you can't do everything alone. And more importantly, accepting help doesn't define who you are. What you do after, that's what matters. Tears were running down Lisa's face now. I'm so tired, she whispered. I'm so tired. I work 11 hours at the hospital and then 6 more cleaning houses. And I sleep maybe 3 or 4 hours a day, and it's still not enough. The rent went up last month. David needed new shoes months ago, but I kept putting it off because every time I saved enough money, something else broke or we needed something else urgent. I send them to school and I know their lunches are too small and their clothes are too old and I feel like the worst mother in the world. You're not, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, reaching across to squeeze Lisa's hand. You're the opposite of that. But you can't pour from an empty cup, Lisa. You can't take care of them if you're running yourself into the ground. Patricia pulled out a folder. We've been working with several parents in the community. They've organized something we're calling the Student Success Initiative. It provides support to families for things kids need to thrive at school. Clothes, shoes, school supplies, even help with after-school care costs. Lisa wiped her eyes. Why? Why would strangers want to help us? Because they're not strangers, Mrs. Rodriguez said. They're your neighbors. They're other parents who know how hard it is. Some of them have been exactly where you are, and others just want to make their community better. There's more, Patricia added. We've been contacted by several local organizations. The hospital where you work has an employee assistance program that can help with childcare costs. There's a community health center that provides services on a sliding scale. And someone anonymously donated funds to cover after-school care for May for the rest of the year. Lisa looked overwhelmed. I don't understand. I don't know how to accept all of this. You don't have to accept everything right now, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Take it one step at a time. But please, at least let us help with the immediate things. We have a school supply store we're setting up, stocked with donations. Families can shop there for whatever their kids need. No cost, no questions asked. And the hospital's assistance program, Patricia added. That's something you've earned through your employment. It's not charity. It's a benefit you're entitled to. Lisa sat silently for a long moment, her hands trembling in her lap. Finally, she looked up at both women. What about David? Does he know about any of this? He knows he received an achievement scholarship for his shoes, Mrs. Rodriguez said. He was so proud, Lisa. You should have seen his face. He thinks he earned it through his good work at school, and honestly, he did. He's an exceptional child. A small smile crossed Lisa's face. He is, isn't he? Both my kids are. They're the reason I keep going. Then let us help you keep going, Patricia said gently. Not because you can't do it alone, but because you don't have to. Because your children deserve a mother who isn't exhausted all the time. Because you deserve a life that's more than just work and worry. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, Lisa had agreed to look into the hospital's assistance program. She'd accepted information about the community health center, and she'd agreed to visit the school supply store once it opened, to get May some warmer clothes for the approaching winter. When Lisa finally left, her steps seemed a little lighter despite her exhaustion. Mrs. Rodriguez and Patricia sat in the empty classroom, both drained from the emotional conversation. Do you think she'll follow through? Patricia asked. I hope so, But even if she doesn't take advantage of everything, at least she knows it's there. At least she knows she's not alone. What neither of them knew was that as Lisa drove to pick up her children from after-school care, she was thinking about things she hadn't let herself think about in years. What if she could cut back to one job instead of two? What if she could actually sleep at night? What if she could spend more time with David and May, help with homework without fighting exhaustion, play with them, be present instead of just surviving? When she picked up both kids, May immediately asked, "Mommy, can we have chicken nuggets for dinner?" Usually Lisa would say no because chicken nuggets weren't in the budget. But tonight, thinking about the assistance program, thinking about the money she might save on childcare and medical costs, she surprised herself. "You know what? Yes, we can have chicken nuggets tonight." Both children cheered. David looked at his mother curiously. "Are you okay, Mom? You seem different." Lisa pulled both her children close, hugging them tight. "I'm more than okay, baby. I'm hopeful." "Do you know how long it's been since I felt hopeful?" David didn't fully understand, but he hugged his mother back. He was wearing his new shoes, and his feet felt comfortable for the first time in months. His mother seemed less tired somehow, even though he knew she'd worked all night. And his little sister was dancing around singing about chicken nuggets. Maybe things were getting better. Maybe that teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been some kind of angel sent to help them. David didn't know about all the conversations and planning happening behind the scenes. He didn't know about the community rallying together or the news story that would air next week or the permanent support programs being established. All he knew was that his mother had smiled tonight. Really smiled. And that was worth more than any pair of shoes. Later that evening, after both children were in bed, Lisa sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea. She'd filled out the application for the hospital's employee assistance program. She'd made an appointment at the community health center, and she'd written down the date and time she could visit the school supply store. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't just surviving. She was allowing herself to imagine a life beyond mere survival, a life where she could be more than just tired, where her children could have what they needed without her sacrificing everything, where accepting help didn't mean she'd failed, but that she was brave enough to let people care. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and Patricia, about the way they'd spoken to her with respect, not pity, about how they'd made it clear this wasn't about her being unable to provide, but about a community wanting to invest in its children. Maybe, just maybe, this town could really be home. Maybe they'd finally found a place where they belonged. The community fundraiser took place on a bright Saturday morning 3 weeks after Mrs. Rodriguez had first noticed David's torn shoes. The school parking lot had been transformed into a festival atmosphere, with booths, food trucks, and activities for children. Diana Foster and her committee had outdone themselves.